Hey guys, welcome to another session of Epic 7. This is my initial thoughts for Ervalen, a new Earth Thief, Scorpio Thief coming out. I also have a video on top model Luluka or ML Luluka and my thoughts on her in another video, so if you want to check that out. I know MLs usually do get more attention. I do want to say that Ervalen does look quite interesting, although I do feel that he's a bit conflicted within his own kit. Before I come to my conclusions and make a summary on what I think, I'm gonna try to do my best, of course, to go with an more or less unbiased view. As you guys know, that these video series have not really been like whether or not you should be pulling for a hero, although sometimes I will subjectively insert my opinion saying that, oh, this hero is a must pull, like Remnant Violence a must pull, ML Cross is a must pull, stuff like that. I will interject that, but hopefully that I'll be able to cover both the positive and the negative of every hero, like without as much bias as possible, without bias. So you guys get like the full spectrum of thought between me, myself, and the of course other content creators, or even yourself as a player. So first things first, we see the stats of a Scorpio. We should be really familiar by now. Selene, not released too long ago. Also Thief, Earth, and Scorpio. This is the I would say like Violet was the one I think got the attention for Scorpio Thieves. While Cez has the exact same thing, I think Violet became like a bigger deal just because you could build him bruisery and he can still do damage. Ervalen is, as you can see there, 1228 attack, very high. HP is very high. Scorpio Thieves do suffer from very low defense, so you want to get as much flat defense in there as possible if you're going for a defensive build, which I think in Ervalen's case you probably will want to. It is weird that his health is like super high base, but that can be a benefit as well. Especially, this is where I find him being conflicted, is just that you kind of have to build him low HP, but then at the same time he needs to survive. So we'll talk about more about that. But one interesting thing is the crit rate is a 23%, but the self imprint concentration is a 16.8. So if you do whale for him, or you get lucky over time, you get a triple less version of Ervalen here, you do get about 40% crit rate innate before putting on any gear, which is pretty spectacular. It means that you can start him off with an immunity set really easily, or you can go with your speed crit set or whatever set you want, lifesteal even. We can talk about that in a bit. And not really have to worry about crit, and you can push the other stats that you kind of want to focus on. So that's kind of nice to have. Let's see, first things first, we'll talk about the skill 3. So attacks the enemy with a sword, adopting a counter-attacking stance and granting a barrier to the caster for 2 turns. When the enemy's max health is greater than the caster's max health, damage dealt increases proportional to the difference up to a maximum of 60%. Barrier strength increases proportional to the caster's attack. So we got the data mine here. I'm making this video about 12 hours later than what I usually do, with the data mine in hand and the data already inputted into the damage calculator, so you could run some tests just like theory crafting tests. So his S3 is at a 1.6 times mod, and the barrier strength is 120% of his self attack. That's a pretty big barrier, knowing that how big Dignus Orb scales on people who use Vivian. That's a pretty big barrier. It can be very big, especially that they share the exact same, I'm talking about Vivian, even though Vivian's a mage, the exact same attack. And we'll see that with ML Luluka, because she's also the same star sign as Vivian as a mage. So so that means it's very promising. 120% barrier for the self attack is a max Dignus Orb plus 30, and the it's a 1.6 times mod. Like I said, the damage difference is quite interesting. The way it's read in the data mine is 0.9% increased damage per 1% health under the enemy's current health. So you take the maximum of the enemy's current health and you subtract to your max health. So sorry, enemy's max health to your max health, you subtracted, and then you multiply by the increased damage, but maximum of the 60%. Now rather than the damage calculator, so I'm gonna take the damage calculator's formula as the key, because the reading up here, the maximum of 60%, like, does that mean the damage dealt difference, or is the health difference? Some may argue that the wording is pretty clear. I'm always like kind of not sure about that. I mean, Smilegate, no offense to Smilegate, but I mean, they have had their fair share of bad reputation in terms of rewording. Therefore, why in a lot of our content patches, they reword skills while saying that the skill itself, like the effect itself, doesn't change, but they reword it. So I don't know, this could be a case for that, but regardless, I took the damage calculator, and what's interesting was that I ran a 10,000 HP of Ervalen and about an 18,000 HP Ruel as like kind of like the target that I'm kind of hitting. I feel that single target nukers right now will probably benefit from knowing if they can kill Ruel, especially if you're into RTA. I had 18,000 HP on the Ruel, so about 8,000 HP difference, and that's where it caps off. It's about 1,000 more damage on a 1,500 defense Ruel, which is very low by any Ruel standards, especially in the upper echelons of PvP. About 1,000 damage per 1,000 HP difference, capped at the 18,000. So 10,000 HP Irvalen, 18,000 HP Ruel, 1,500 defense. It was 1,000 per 1,000 health missing, which is a pretty big difference, which was why I think that this skill might be pretty strong. Like I said, it's at 1.6 times mod. Based on my calculation, it ends up being capped at about 2.5 times mod, which is a fairly solid single target damaging skill. But if you guys are really familiar with Epic 7 and how the damage fall off kind of works, it's just kind of like how defense, if you have like, you know, 2,000 defense versus a 2,400 defense, yes, you're going to mitigate more damage as your defense goes up, but there's like a curve to it where like there's a point where like the amount of defense you have on a hero may not matter as much. It's the same thing for the damage, especially it doesn't penetrate defense, it doesn't have any other stackable mods, and it caps at 60% max. I think the health, based on the skill description here. So yes, it's gonna do a lot more damage, but is it still one-shot Ruel material? Based on the calculator, if you run it at 1,800 defense Ruel, you can't kill off the Ruel on a standstill, even with an attack buff. He doesn't self-attack buff, so assuming that he does get an attack buff from an outside source, whether Moonlight Dreamblade or an attack buffer, you're not gonna one-shot that Ruel, at least based on the damage that I've set him to. I set at a 4,000 attack and 300 crit damage. Important notes is that the soul burn, although costs 20 souls, does extend the duration of the buff granted to one turn by one more turn, but also grants another turn. So that could be very important when, you know, thinking about his skills and, you know, what have you. Just keep in mind that the counter-attacking stance is the counter-attack buff, like I said. So it could be very, very good if you have some kind of evasion type artifact. I think Violet Talisman would be good if you pair him up with outside source attack buffers. Moonlight Dreamblade, I think, comes to mind for me here, because if he's gonna be in like a situation where you can't get an attack buff, having a beefy barrier like Vivian's, if you have him at high defense somehow, with flat defense of course on your stats, and then he has counter and maybe on a lifesteal set, he might be like kind of like the perfect version in a way of Green Violet, Remnant Violet, and I don't know, so like and a Vivian. But just know that although all of these things are packed into one skill, they can all be stripped by one Melissa S3. So just keep that in mind. This is where I feel like, okay, it's kind of a bit scary. But just know that the soul burn, 20 souls, very costly, is a pretty worth it one if you really think about the way you might use them, because it grants that extra turn and the additional duration of the buff. Irvalen's S3. I'll admit this. Originally I thought Irvalen was a girl, before, like, you know, reading the lore or whatever. But just looking at it, but then it's all that, I'm like, whoa. But then now understanding a bit of the story, I'm like, okay, I kind of get it, man. He's got the innocent face, but man, he's like out for blood. I like this face though, it's really cool. This is the a screenshot of just what happens here. The attack buff, as you see there, is obviously not his own. He doesn't self-attack buff. And like I said, I think this is why Moonlight Dreamblade might be pretty good on him, but it does depend on how you want to use him. I do not see that a Portrait of Savior will really help, especially with his damage scaling already. You might get like 2,000 more damage based on the stats that I inputted. into the damage calculator, and 2000 could be make or break. I mean, 2000 might be exactly what you need to like nuke out the Ruel. Notice that there is no ignoring damage share, and like I said, no defense penetration. Both things very important right now in single target nukers, unless their nuking skill has something else. So here's where I'm a bit conflicted. Just even from the S3, I was almost hoping that he wouldn't have the differential HP mechanic, which is new. From my knowledge, he's the first hero to have this mechanic, which is kind of cool as well, because then this may be one of the things that Smilegate was talking about in terms of fixing the tank meta, right? If you start inputting some mechanics where heroes can do more damage based on the HP difference, that could be a decent game changer. Now, if you mix that with some kind of like, I mean, he's a thief, so he could use Aliha's knife. So just remember that. So I think with Aliha's knife, that could be really crazy too. So penetrate 20% defense. What do you think about those kind of things? And he might not be bad, but I would almost put him as right now, he's like a prototype testing type of hero. Like, you know, you don't want his HP that low because he could be squishy, like I said. So like it's more of like how where are you gonna use him? If he goes into stripping fights, or you know, fights where enemies can debuff him, it takes away like almost half of his kit, I feel. And his S2 is no different as well. S2 is 1.4 times mod, super high power. S2 actually very high. It's almost as good as a lot of heroes S3s. The raw damage mola on the S3, I should note, is 30%. The one in S2 is also another 30%, but it's +5. It grants the immunity for him for 1 turn, like sort of useful. But the thing is, it's a 2-turn skill cooldown, so that's very nice to have. But it is only 1 turn immunity. And then again, we see a differential between the enemy's max health, so the one you're attacking, versus his max health. So he's gonna more often than not go for the highest HP hero, which is again where I feel that it's setting himself apart, where the conflict starts occurring to me. So like, the higher the HP they have, the more CR boost you gain, right? So it's self CR boost himself. The lower the HP you have, which is usually the damage threats, the stuff that you want to nuke with your nuker, so in Ervalen's case, you don't get a CR boost. It does have high mods, so it's definitely still usable to nuke out another DPS. You know, some people may say that, hey, you already nuked out the strongest DPS with your S3, so your S2 could be used just as a CR boost, and I totally agree. I totally think you could do that. But again, that's where the conflict happens. It doesn't, the whole kit doesn't really feel like, oh, it's like super swift, super easy to use. You know, not like Remnant Violet, where it's like just 2 skills to use and the passive just like always kicks in. Or an ML Crow. Like those heroes are like, there are some heroes I reviewed in the past where it's just like, the kit is just like, it's sound. There's no brainer on how you want to use it. What's interesting about Irvalen, of course, is that once you get the counter buff up, and assuming you don't get stripped and you have that barrier, let's say you do have Moonlight Dreamblade, let's say you're on lifesteal set, it changes so much dynamic, especially if you're fighting, let's say, RTA. Because you have so much going for it, so much RNG involved. So that could be very interesting, and then you can pick and choose which skill you want to use at what time. Not necessarily killing your target quick, but maybe setting up for a kill, or just delaying the fight just for 1 more turn, maybe for another hero of yours. That's where I'm thinking that, you know, he could be okay, like decent turn cycling, potentially good survivability. We'll have to see about that. Based on the data mine here, it's a 0.49 combat readiness per 1% self health under the enemy's current health. No matter how I looked at that, I really didn't know how to calculate it, so I had to look at the YouTube video that Smilegate posted out for Ervalen. He's about a 10,000 HP in the video, and he attacks 27,000 HP Fallen Cecilia, and gains about a 25% CR boost. Now again, the writing here of the maximum of 30% is that the maximum of 30% CR boost. I think contextually, that's probably it, but on the video, it looked to be about a 25% CR boost, which is a huge CR boost by any stretch of the imagination. It's a very big CR boost, but I think the 30% could be just the difference between the HP as well. But regardless, I read the data mine, the mods, so I mean, you could do the math. My math is never my strong suit. Roughly, the S1, it's good. It's good. No complaint about it at all. It doesn't make or break his kit. I think his kit really revolves around his S2, S3, that kind of combination there. The S1 is up to a 50% chance of defense break, another 30% raw damage. So very standard S1, S2, S3. I don't think he's really meant to be like this like end all be all nuker. I think other nukers like, you know, Cigarette or something like that would be a bit stronger. Although Cigarette, Lilibet, all these other like single target nukers have more survivability issues than Ervalen does. So in that sense, Ervalen is very good, just kind of like out of the box. But my question would be like, if you're an experienced player and you've played for a long time, you have your roles covered. Like you go to your Sirmia, you go to your Yufine for your single target nuke damage. My question would be like, would you use Ervalen? That is my question. In the video, it did kind of showcase that, oh, you get the counter, like, so you can soul burn, right? You can soul burn the S3 for an extra turn. You can go into the S2, grant yourself an immunity. You're sitting with a barrier counter buff. You're sitting with an immunity buff on the S2, and then if an enemy attacks you and you have this thick barrier with you have high base defense, maybe you have an Aureus on your team, then you know you counter, and then you might defense break 50% of the time for 2 turns. So by the next turn, if they don't cleanse it, Ervalen can come back with a with a vengeance. Hey yo. Okay, anyways, pun aside, it's solid, and that's all I can say about Ervalen. He's solid, but I feel that it's a bit tough right now in the bruiser meta. His damage doesn't output as high as you would like. It's not as easy, right? He doesn't have damage sheer ignore, he doesn't have defense penetration. Those 2 things are the biggest things right now. Someone is going to run some sort of damage mitigation if they see you, let's say in RTA, draft Ervalen. There's like, or they're just gonna outspeed you. So like you're gonna be like kind of turning your wheels on like, what's the best build? Now I gave my ideas on it. I think a speed set always fine. Start off with an immunity if you have it, I think. But I don't know if you want to build them bruisery. Maybe you do. Maybe you want to build them like how people used to build green violet. Not necessarily on a lifesteal set, but sort of bruisery. If you guys know Code is always known. At least he was like, I would say one of the forefathers of global to have kind of popularized it, because he's a streamer. Popularized like the bruiser, like DPS meta. So like almost like always like a defense main ring or something with like really high attack substats, something like that. That might work as well. If you choose to ignore the HP differential damage, that might work in his case. But like I said, the problem is that once you strip it, it's gone. So like once you strip it, no counter buff, no barrier. And I know you can say that about a lot of people, a lot of heroes, but like Remnant Violet and even Green Violet have their own benefits. So if Remnant Violet, if you still miss him, if he has Moonlight Dreamblade, even though his evasion buff is stripped, he can still get his focus off. And if they're blind, he can still get his focus off, so he can still do like additional damage when you don't want him to. This is why I feel like Irvalen is the struggle. Even if you build him bruisery, does he have enough? Does he have what it takes, like a Green Violet, to kind of, you know, always evade at a 35% chance once the apple is on cooldown? You know. So that's my thought. That's my concern about Irvalen. So in terms of a single target damage, and if you could control the fight, especially versus an AI team, solid. I think, my own opinion, and don't listen to me, if you like him and if you need a single target nuke, I think he's a good option. But I think I might have to skip him, especially I was kind of forced to pull Landy because she was a limited hero. Good news is that Smilegate said that they're looking into buffing her, so I don't know when that's gonna come, but that would be the first limited hero to be buffed. Landy, that is. The artifact, I don't know, man. I don't think it's really that crazy on him either. I mean, a silence for 1 turn is fantastic, but that's assuming that you can counter or you can get the turns, assuming they're not on immunity. increase the attack by 10. This is why when I see this one, I'm like looking at what we have available to us, and I think something like Violet Talisman would probably be best suited for him. Evasion with barrier evasion on him, I think, is probably more important than actually silencing an enemy. That's my thoughts, at least. Anyways, I'm gonna end that here for my thoughts on Ervalen. If you guys want to check out the ML Lulika or top model Lulika video, that'll be in another one. So I'm gonna end this here. If you guys have Discord, check out the Discord server. Follow me on Twitter, subscribe to YouTube if you haven't. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.